Peter knows so much. His ideas are ideas he collected. He is a collector. That's why he knows so much. But the more he spoke, the more it became apparent to me that he knows so much more. He knows about things that are nowhere to be found in this place. Someone once told me that architecture has always been an invitation to talk about everything. Vitruvius wrote that an architect must know everything, from reading music to reading the zodiac. Peter said that his granny was from East Clare in West Ireland and that she owned the largest house in the village. It opened onto the street with no front garden. People would drive up to the front door, and inside there was a shop, a petrol pump, a post office and a pharmacy. She was very secretive, but Peter says that they knew that she knew everybody's business. That's why he values a sense of place. A small space can have a rich internal life, embodied. His grandma was the place because she knew the place, and because the place knew her. That's probably how Peter learnt that he needed to know. This house is a microcosm, past and future. It takes a poet to tell a story about a place, and yet, even a poet can never tell a story about everything that's there. A good poet always chooses one object, and in the story of that well-chosen object will be the story of the whole place. In Dublin, I met Shane, and he took me on an odyssey across the city. Shane thinks that to understand him, one needs to understand Dublin. I thought to myself, no. To know Dublin, one needs to know Shane. Reflecting on the history of epic journeys, we arrive at the south corner of St. Stephen's Green. It's raining outside, typical August in Dublin, Shane says. The white stone building there was built by him and John some years ago. That's Portland stone, Shane remarks, and opens the car window so we can see it clearly. It's roachbed stone from the very bottom of the quarry. We went to the Isle of Portland to look at it. At its base is golden granite. It's harder and shinier, and comes from a quarry just south of Dublin. I ask him about the black stone woven with fossils at the base of every window. That's Irish limestone, he says. Perhaps it was because of the texture of his voice, but I was convinced that Shane was born on Inishmaan, one of the Aran Islands about 12 miles out from the west coast of Ireland. In fact, I had already begun to tell myself a compelling story of his deep connection to that landscape and how it presents itself in his architecture. I even went as far as starting to think about Plato and Aristotle, and how they thought that all art is an imitation of nature. Plato saw this as deceptive and flawed, but Aristotle saw it as fruitful. One could say that principally an architect also draws everything from nature, not just materials, but structural principles, principles of scale and orientation, space. All this became a little more complicated when Mary told me that the landscape of the Aran Islands is in fact a built landscape. Even before Mary explained everything, I felt unsettled. I thought of Alexander Pope, who thought of the Roman poet Virgil, who thought of the Greek poet Homer. According to Pope, when Virgil set out to write his national epic, he came to the view that the Iliad and the Odyssey are pure and complete representations of nature, capturing the world in all its vibrant glory. After all, without any literary predecessors, Homer only had nature to imitate. He did it so well that Virgil felt there was nothing left to say. But Mary didn't say that she was unsettled when she first encountered the deep intelligence of the builders of the Aran Islands. She was inspired. Virgil was in agony. He realised that if he couldn't imitate nature, because Homer had already done that, he would have to imitate Homer. According to Pope, Virgil eventually came to the view that Homer and nature are one. To imitate Homer is to imitate nature. Mary understood the connection the builders of the landscape had with the native landscape they transformed. It is a harmony. Mary told me that she finds herself longing for a harmony such as this, a deeper and longer perspective. She said that she wanted to turn her back on Dublin, to look west, away from London, away from Europe, and to the islands, to the landscape and to the rural world, away from urbanism. When Mary arrived there, she saw lots of small walls and lots of small fields inside them. The walls are built of glacial debris scattered across the landscape, but the fields are also made with human hands. There was hardly any soil there, so they gathered seaweed and sand from the shore and mixed it with shale. There's a bit of shale on the island which supports the indigenous soil. They mix it together, she says, and then they lay a field. Here, building in harmony with the natural world is about gathering rainwater, gathering the glacial debris, the seaweed and the sand. Whether it is those who built the walls of the Aran Islands, or the Bronze Age field monuments, or early medieval castles and towns, what Mary sees in all of them is a deep understanding of siting, of building in the landscape. Yet all this time, Mary lived in Dublin, North Dublin, Old Georgian Core as it's called. A few days before I visited the island, I met Shane in Galway. It was then that he told me that he too is a Dubliner, and it was in fact his brother who went to the island as a young man. He met a woman there and stayed. Shane goes to Inishmaan often, and when he does, he likes to take the small airplane from the airport just west of Galway. It takes 5 minutes, he told me. You should take the little plane. They weigh you and your bags before boarding, and you get a seat based on how much you weigh. I went to the airport, but the flight that day was sold out, so I took the ferry. I roamed around the island for a couple of hours, The island was small, but the distances were vast. I remembered Shane's words, that he was influenced by the landscape and by the light, and that's it. It was the height of the season for blackberries. I drank my bottle of water and gave myself a task to fill it with blackberries before the ferry arrived to take me back. As I picked them, my mind turned to thoughts about the origins of concrete. The Romans observed the ashes of erupting volcanoes mixed together with gravel and seawater on Mediterranean beaches. They formed a solid, unbreakable and water-resistant mass, at first fluid and then solid. Concrete was once just an observation of a natural process. I then remembered how, in the summer of exactly 10 years prior, I spent hours sitting outside of the Pantheon in Rome and would return there day after day. If we are to tell a story about the trajectory of thought, the history of material, tectonic, and cultural practice, this magnificent concrete structure is the perfect point of departure. As the Romans developed the recipe of what they saw on the beaches, the mix of the volcanic ash, gravel, and seawater, they were able to build the Pantheon. And in fact, rebuild the Pantheon. The one we see today isn't even the first one. The history of imitation is rather long, or can we call it influence? This Pantheon was built by Hadrian, but the inscription on the entrance says that Marcus Agrippa built it. Agrippa didn't construct this Pantheon, but the one that was there before. Hadrian honoured his predecessor. He understood the value of acknowledgement, of the lineage of ideas, cultural and spatial. If there is one form that is infinitely repeated and referenced throughout the history of architecture, this is it. Before meeting Shane in Dublin, I went to see his project in Cork, but I still haven't had a chance to ask him about it. We were still parked at the south corner of St Stephen's Green in Dublin. Shane was looking at the white stone and said that he and John went to Finland to look at Alvar Aalto's Finlandia Hall, a white building that John was very fond of. I thought of this Virgil and Homer business again. Once Virgil accepted that to imitate Homer is to imitate nature, a world of creative possibilities opened up. Increasingly, philosophers have resisted discussing art as an imitation of nature and begun discussing it as an imitation of other art. Art, in other words, by other artists. John wanted to do a white stone building like Aalto. T.S. Eliot said that dead writers are remote from us because we know so much more than they did, but it is precisely they that we know. While John loved Aalto, Shane loved Khan, or Lou, as he called him. I cut that corner there, Shane pointed at the entrance of the building, just like Lou did on the Mellon building. Shane also pointed at the stainless steel windowsills, and said nothing about Lou regarding that detail. Some months later, I would come to wonder about a similar detail on Lou's building in New Haven. Lou revealed a void within his bent windowsill on the ground floor. I was puzzled by it until I discovered the same detail in the handrail of the staircase inside. I was forbidden to take a picture of it as the building was under refurbishment, but it occurred to me that the void was very intentional. We are presented with the thinness and therefore the strength of the material that encloses the entire building. Lou wanted to show us how this seemingly heavy facade is actually very thin. I seem to remember seeing something similar near Vicenza. What has Lou seen, I wondered, and where? Thinking of the white stone building in Dublin, I then remembered that Shane and John did express the thickness of the material that clads the building. I should have asked Shane about this, and whether he himself, when working for Lou as a young architect, produced drawings for the empty windowsill on the Mellon building. Wandering around Trinity College in Dublin, where Shane and John have built a number of projects, one might begin to ask, how does a young architect find a voice? Some might think that the secret to this is to become very large, like the rabbit in Wallace Stevens' poem, Rabbit, as king of the ghosts. It grows so large, it dominates everything around it. Some might feel that that's the way to stand out. But to find a voice, an architect often must do quite the opposite. To compromise, to give away the imaginative scope, to peel layers off, to shrink in size, and to make space for others. By giving space out, an architect carves out space for themselves, setting themselves apart from others, including their predecessors and their teachers. We had lunch in Shane's study, where the space is dominated by a couple of framed sketches Lou made on tracing paper on top of Shane's working drawings. Some of these drawings were done by Khan overnight and contained notes and instructions for a young Shane. They speak of the uniqueness of this peculiar education. One is not born an architect. One does not realize that they are at a very young age, or discover a talent for architecture. One normally doesn't even become one having gone through architectural education. Usually, one becomes an architect by working with, or more commonly for, another architect. Shane recalls days in Lou's office, as well as accompanying Lou at meetings in New Haven with the president of the university. Immediately after the meeting, Lou would tell Shane to take the next train and go back to the office. He wanted to have dinner with Scully. Unlike a poet or an artist, an architect must be an apprentice, to learn through another architect, to be another architect, to be another architect. Sheila met Shane a few years later. It was his first year teaching, and it was her first year studying architecture. With a reference from Lou, Shane got the teaching job at the University College Dublin. Sheila said how inspiring Shane was. He talked to the students about light and the weight of materials, and how they ought to think about what the brick would want to be. Sheila said how this divided their year, even the school, and how, when the line was drawn, she knew which side she wanted to be on. In Sheila's second year, Khan came to Dublin to give a lecture, and when he spoke, for a brief moment she thought that Khan was so very influenced by Shane. Shane never spoke to them about Khan, but was it Khan who spoke through Shane? Is this how an architect begins to find a voice? Is this Dublin or Cork, or Cambridge, England, or Exeter, New Hampshire. Perhaps it doesn't matter. This is a dialogue. At moments, it seems like you are in many places, looking at many buildings, but in others, you will be certain of your surroundings and what you see in front of you. Influence is not a line that can be traced. This is a conversation between Shane and John, and Sheila and Lou, and Yvonne and Shelley, and many of their students, and their students, and many of the teachers of their teachers. We are also in dialogue with those whose students we have never met, and with landscapes and places. The framed drawings in Shane's study were the drawings of his teacher and friend Lou. But what surrounds those drawings, what gives them context, a wallpaper of sorts, are the drawings of Andrea Palladio, the entirety of his 4 books on architecture. It was only when Shane went to bring some coffee that I started to think about this telling curation, yet another dialogue. Khan in conversation with a 16th century architect from Veneto in northern Italy, and Shane is surrounded by both. I thought of T.S. Eliot again, who said that an artist must engage deeply with what he calls the mind of Europe, a collective historical consciousness. Shane understands that contributing to tradition, as well as projecting influence forwards into the future, involves a heightened awareness of a much broader context. With his wife Una, they spent summer holidays in northern Italy. They stayed in a monastery in Padova. That was their base. On bikes and buses and trains, they saw all of the villas and all of the public buildings in Venice and Verona and Vicenza. And when they came back home to Ireland, they would visit country houses. You go to see some houses near Dublin, and you think you're in Italy, Shane said. The only difference is 200 years. It's easy to dream about Palladio. In the work of Shane and John, his influence might not be immediately evident, but after finding it on the walls, I tried to find it in the wooden building in the centre of Dublin. So much of Palladio is in plan, I said to Shane. After a long pause and a deep stare, he said, "Yes, but his buildings are very three-dimensional." Urban palazzos in section reveal their origins in the need for ventilation, and the countryside villas too are very situated in the landscape. Here, in his words, one architect interprets another. I went to the casino at Marino on the north edge of Dublin. William Chambers interprets Palladio here in bricks and mortar. I've been thinking so much about the influence of my predecessors, tempted by their language, the language that I admire, or that I'm taught to admire. There is an internal battle here, finding a voice, breaking the magnetism of forces from the past. The casino at Marino was designed by William Chambers, but in it I see a clear line to Palladio's Villa La Rotonda in Vicenza. Enough that, as I drifted off to sleep that evening, my mind constructed a confused collage where those two buildings became one. I raised the ground floor of the casino at Marino to the height of the Villa La Rotonda, and I allowed the cool afternoon light of Dublin to fall on the terrazzo floors in Vicenza. In the process of finding our own voice, do we amend the predecessor? Our referencing of the past changes the past, in the same way that the past has shaped us. Our reading of it, or it might be safer to say our misreading of it, changes it. Perhaps we are more powerful than we think. We have the power to start new dialogues, and in doing so, make something new. To be innovative. There are certain aspects of the work of Kahn and Shane that from time to time I absolutely indulge myself in, Neil remarked. When Neil is designing a library for a Cambridge college made of rich red brickwork in the Jacobean or Tudor Elizabethan tradition, and when he is placing a new building into that ensemble of ancient buildings, he says that it's clear to him, at the level of his gut, that Kahn understood and knew that tradition. Whether through his journeys in Europe or through his New England Puritanism, Kahn understood the way that those people made joinery and used brickwork, and he made his buildings from that tradition. Neil said how Kahnian joinery has been relished and brought forward by Shane, and how Neil himself goes on to quote Kahn in a joinery detail in the interior of his library at Magdalen College, Cambridge. But then, not all of Kahn's language is something Neil intuitively relates to. There are parts I connect to, he says. When he's more open and creates more open, field-like buildings, I'm at ease with it. When he's more geometrically formal, I begin to lose him. It's not that Neil doesn't admire those buildings, but the Exeter Library, its atrium and enormous circles, overwhelm him. He says it's where, in a sense, there's a geometric formal system that grabs hold of the project and has it by the scruff of the neck, a strongly Platonic geometric formalism about the buildings. As I roam around the architectural salvage a few miles away from Lou's Exeter Library in New Hampshire, I consider if the essence of innovation lies in the successor's bold interpretation, misinterpretation of the precursor. It's probably in this misreading that we're able to reach the great achievement in the creation of architecture. A surprise. Anyway, I've learnt that good architecture always fails to meet our expectations. I wouldn't go as far as to say that surprise is innovation, but surprise sits deeply in the psychology of every innovation. A revelation feels like a small betrayal. When I entered the Pantheon for the first time, had I not seen it in history books, the round space inside the rectangular exterior would have probably been a complete surprise. But an element of twisted expectation was there, regardless. I had a similar sensation when I entered Kahn's library in Exeter. I expected to encounter the monolithic void, but it was not immediately there. Stairs dressed in travertine led me to it, and the most compelling experience of the central space was, in fact, through a small opening on the top floor, hidden within the depth of the concrete trusses. Somehow this monumental atrium had twisted and revealed itself to me here again as something you might find in a German expressionist film. On my way to the train station, I occasionally stopped to admire the vernacular of New England. Thinking of all the compelling misreadings I had made of all the things I've seen, I began to wonder, what is this architecture misreading? I thought about how every small betrayal is the beginning of a new voice. I stood there for a while, in the freezing cold, and then I had to go.